Welcome to Step Family Network. I'm very excited about the topic we're speaking about today. We're actually doing a panel interview, and the topic is dual vision for blended families, honoring the past and looking forward. And Kristine Stensland is actually the one that approached me about the topic, and I thought it was a really phenomenal idea to be able to present this and bring this to our platform. Kristine, can you give us a little insight and vision of why you wanted to promote this particular topic?
Sure. So Inheritance of Hope is an organization that I was made familiar with a couple years ago because I have friends who actually volunteer and work for Inheritance of Hope. And in the pivot that happened last year and they had to go all online to support their families, they said, listen, we're doing an e-reunion. And now we know that some of our families that we've served have remarried and recoupled. And now they're living a blended family life. And, we know that you lead groups here, you've started a nonprofit to support blended families. Like, hey, you're our friend. Would you work with us to do something for this e-reunion last year? And I said, absolutely. And then this year, the Vision 2021 that Inheritance of Hope is also doing online, they just said, hey, can you participate again this year? And they just said, is there a panel or something that you can pull together? And so that's why we're all here. I'm connected to you all in strange ways, or meeting you for the first time, but I'd heard you speak, Diane. So that's why we're here. And the vision is really to match the vision of Inheritance of Hope, right? Their Vision 2021 is how they're going to serve the families and their communities in Inheritance of Hope. And for us, if you look, we have to honor the looking back and honoring what happened to us prior to being in a blended family, and then also looking forward and how do we best navigate that journey so that we can best love and serve those in our families. So that's what the dual vision is looking back and honoring what we see and being aware of what has happened and impacts our families, but looking forward with hope and how do we best serve and love those in our family. Long answer. Sorry.
I love that topic. No, it's a great answer, and thank you for answering that. And then, since we have you, let's start the introductions. Kristine, can you explain what you do in the step family realm and your platform?
Sure. So, Kristine Stensland, and I am actually located in Rochester, Minnesota, and I have been in a blended family for 15 years. And so, through that journey, we have just tried to love on and serve blended families in just getting our own support. So we've started blended family in our own church, but we also have helped launch blended families in other church. And then in 2021 here, we actually founded a nonprofit called Guide Your Heart, which is supporting marriages along a whole continuum from premarital education, but also through to divorce recovery support, grief, and then blended family support. So we are heavily invested in making sure that families have the strength that they need to stay together. So, and then we've launched an app that we'll talk about later too. It just helps draw out the family map that blended families are walking, so that you can better navigate that journey. So,
Diane, would you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background in helping blended families?
Great. Thank you, Shar. Yeah, I'm Diane Ingram and I'm located in Fort Collins, Colorado. And I married a widower with 2 young children 27 years ago. So my journey has been that long arc of blending, learning, watching the kids grieve and re-grieve over all of those years. And now those young kids are in their 30s, and my husband and I are still together. So that's very good news, and hopefully will provide some hope for people. But along the way, in conversations with Ron Deal, who most of you probably will know in the step family, blended family arena, I said, hey, there's no resource for our situation. You've written about divorce and the fallout from divorce, but not about how to step in as a step parent when there's been a death. And he said, you should write the book. So I did. I wrote a book called Step Parenting the Grieving Child, and have a Facebook group of the same name, but really, really eager to help others know they're not alone and talk about that journey with you all today.
I see why Kristine invited you to this event or to this panel. Great to have you, Diane. Thank you. And then Tom and Heather, can you give us a little introduction about who you are and how you help blended families?
Sure. Our connection is through Inheritance of Hope. As just my personal connection there was I was able to go on the very first legacy retreat back in 2008 with my first wife, Shannon, who had metastatic melanoma and then passed away about a month after that retreat. I have had two adopted boys at that time who were young, both international adoptions, and then entered into another step family, got remarried not long after that, thinking that it was going to be easy, thinking that I had a good first marriage, and so I should be able to, know how this works. And unfortunately, that approach did not work out so well. It was a lot harder than I thought, and it ended in a divorce. And so then went for about 5 years being a single dad. And I'll turn it over to Ed.
So my connection with Inheritance of Hope is actually how we met, but it started in 2014. My late husband, John, was diagnosed with ALS early in that year. And we actually lived in the same town as the co-founder, Derek Milligan, and had a mutual friend. And so she referred us to Inheritance of Hope to go on a legacy retreat for this great vacation where we could meet other families dealing with terminal illness and just gain some tools for just leaving a legacy and have a chance to make memories with our family too. We had two boys that were 4 and 10. And actually, we were already a step family. So Eric, my 10-year-old, was from my first marriage. And I got divorced from his dad when he was about 2 years old and started dating John shortly after. And then we got married and had Jason. And that was a much different experience than the step family now. It really was much more simple. I was coming out of a divorce, so I was much more humbled, I think. Not as much now, but God continues to do that. And also just very vulnerable. And John was very good at kind of coming in without pressure or force. And he really became just that stepdad, loved Eric like his own. And so we just didn't have as many struggles and just really were a great family. Saw God work in just incredible ways during his illness. And he passed away in 2016. And then after that, I started volunteering and fundraising for Inheritance of Hope. And so in May of 2017, we actually both packed our bags to go to Orlando to serve other families dealing with terminal illness. And that's where we met. What do you want to add to that?
And then shortly thereafter,
he was just blown away and amazed by me.
And shortly after we got married, and here we are 4 years later, trying to work all this out.
Yeah, and one thing we did realize, we did get married pretty quickly. We met in May and we got married in December. We knew it was going to be difficult. So going into this step family, we both had, I think, a lot more appropriate expectations and recognizing the hard work it was going to take. And so even before we got married, there was quite a bit of, we recognized the importance of professional help and counseling, especially with our kids and the baggage, the grief, the struggles. And so that's been really helpful and have continued to kind of glean wisdom from others who have walked that journey, which is actually even how we met Kristine not too long ago. So
yes, they were sitting in front of me at a Family Life Blended Family Ministry Summit, and they were both wearing their Inheritance of Hope shirts. And I'm like, wait a minute, I know that logo. So that's how I was introduced to them. And then those same friends that invited me this year when I was, and Inheritance of Hope said that they would connect me with people too. But I'm like, I've already met Heather and Todd, so let's just do that. So I got tracked them down.
Well, thank you for the introductions. It's phenomenal to have you all here. It's understood that all blended families are born out of loss. And that's really profound to understand. What are some of the differences of blending families after divorce versus blending after death?
Yeah, I'm super excited to hear about Heather and Tom. You have both, so you get to talk about it. But, like one of the things that I know, and I've worked with a few families that have been formed out of a death, it's interesting to watch because having gone through the divorce, for me, my recoupling, I was looking for something different. I didn't want to have that same experience again. I wanted a better marriage. And so I think sometimes, at least what I've watched, and I'd be curious from your guys' perspective, when families are formed out of a death, a lot of times you honor and revere that marriage that it came from, and you want a redo of that same experience if you had a positive marriage. And so I just watched some people struggle with how does that look different. And so sometimes the tools that we use in a blended family guide as we guide folks through blended families might not always serve those born out of loss as well. So that's one of the differences I see, is that's a redo versus do not want to redo.
I'll jump in with a quick one, and then we can turn it over to Heather and Tom to discuss both aspects. I think there's a tender trap when there's been a death, in that the person who died is not physically present. So in a divorce situation, lots of times the kids have the ability to see both parents if that's part of the divorce, legal agreement. And it takes a lot of learning to realize that just because the parent who died isn't physically there, they are still emotionally and spiritually there. And we fall into this tender trap of maybe trying to step into the role that the natural parent who died had a little too much, because they are not physically there. And that is a learning experience for everyone, for the kids, for the natural parent surviving, and for the step parent.
I think for my experience, it was very different as well, in that normally in, I think, for both of us, coming off of a divorce sort of puts you in a more of a meek, more of a humble pattern, and that your confidence, I think, takes a hit whenever you're coming off a divorce. But whenever you're coming off of a death of a spouse, once again, you sort of feel like you know what you're doing and want to replicate that. But that often, I think, leads to some wrong way to approach that next marriage, because it's going to be different.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest, difference for me that stands out, and I have to be very mindful of, Ron Deal talks about like the ghosts of your past loves. I don't remember the exact phrase that he uses, but there's this comparison trap, right? And so in a divorce situation, there are different situations that can happen that can lead to triggers of, feeling like abandoned or lied to. And then you kind of, for me, it ends up being, I want independence. I'm going to distance myself. But not only do I have that, but I also have certain things that trigger okay, you're not just, don't be like my ex, but why can't you be more like my spouse that passed away? Why can't you be more like John? And that's not a very healthy approach to take either, because obviously Tom is not John, and I don't want him to be, because he's very unique and special on his own. But there's definitely, I think, a trap that's easy to get into of, just wanting it to be like it was, and that just because it was easy and we'd already figured it out. And so now we have to figure it out again with somebody new. And you already have this ideal and this standard of how it should be, and yet you're not reaching it, which can sometimes be discouraging. So it's important to just be very mindful and aware, I think.
Well, I think even from the kids' perspective, right? So in a divorce, most likely, or often the ones that we're associated with anyway, most likely the kids are going back and forth between a couple homes. And so they're constantly seeing two different family structures, and there's some ambiguity. And quite frankly, we've seen it and we've been told that, your children often are fighting to try to get you guys back together. That's what they long for, because that's their bio parent, right? Whereas in a loss from death, they don't have that opportunity, right? So it's just a different set of grieving. And how do you navigate that as a couple? I mean, that's just some tough stuff.
Just following up about the kids, one thing that I've seen and learned is that in a divorce situation, kids don't trust the permanence of relationships.
Oh, yeah.
But in a death situation, they may not trust the permanence of life. Wow. And that's a huge difference.
Right. And wow. And Heather and Tom get to navigate and help in both of those situations.
Both of those situations, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, Tom, I have a question. You mentioned self-esteem of divorce. That you can you expand a little more on that? I was actually very intrigued by that.
I mean, I just know for me personally, like I was saying, coming off of I had the death first, and so going into that second relationship, I really thought that it would be the same, because I really thought, hey, I've done this before. I know it's, no marriage is completely easy. We had our struggles, but we worked through them and really felt very confident in going into that relationship because I had, that good experience. But once I had the divorce, really, that really showed me that I didn't know what I was doing, that I didn't necessarily, know how to work through that relationship. And so really my confidence really took a big hit there. And so entering into it, the relationship with Heather, I didn't have quite the confidence that I had before. So yeah, it really.
And I feel like a piece of it for me isn't necessarily humility as much as it is fear. Just because of being burned, of being hurt. And that makes it a lot more difficult, I think, to step into a new relationship and just fully trust and surrender and give, without that kind of holding back a little bit. Yeah, I was able to, I think, give a lot more freely with Tom because I wasn't necessarily afraid like I was the first time. I was much slower when I met John, of really kind of giving him my heart to hurt, right?
Yeah. Diane, you've been a stepmom for 27 years, and your stepchildren lost their mother. Can you tell us a little bit about that story and how that was for you in your role as a stepmom to actually handle the kids and their emotions, and what emotions I'm sure that brought between you and your husband? I'd love to hear more about that.
Absolutely. The growth journey for me was huge. And that's what I ended up writing about a lot, was focusing on myself and how I had to change, that I couldn't expect the kids or even, my husband so much to change in terms of how they were grieving their former wife and mom. So I think when I entered the relationship, I felt like, okay, I've been a camp counselor. I like kids. I'm a good person. It was all very optimistic. And I thought, this is going to be great. Everything's going to be fine. And it's good. It's good to enter with that optimism. But, fast forward, 5 years into the marriage, I was like, my goodness, I still feel like our family is not gelling. Like some days are great. And then sometimes on a weekend when there's no structure, no school, no activities, the kids just seem so sad and down and are not connecting with me. So that was about the time frame where I realized that I had to do some changing. And so I started going to counseling and getting some advice and doing a lot of praying and reading and collecting of resources. And there is a specific moment in the journey, and if you want me to address that,
we'd love to hear that.
Okay, all right. So I mentioned counseling. I was in counseling, and I was like, "Hey, we've been together 5 years. It just feels like things should be gelling." And I had a jaw-dropping moment. That was number one, when the counselor said, 5 years is a drop in the bucket. It's nothing. You're still in the relationship building stage. That was a shock to me. And that's when I realized that I had to stop trying to measure progress in our step family, that it was maybe always going to be a little bit of the one step forward, 2 steps back. And then aha, number 2 was, hey, I need to do something. So I actually found a retreat that was focused on expressing creative expressions of grieving. And it was at a church, which was wonderful. So we took half a day and we had a lot of reflection time. And we were just asked to do whatever, write, draw, pantomime, do whatever was going to help us express our own grief in our lives. And I started just drawing, and I ended up drawing a garden. And I started thinking about the elements of the garden. What does the garden need to grow? Well, it needs water, it needs light, it needs good soil, clearing the weeds. I'm like, wow, this sounds like a step family. So my big aha from that drawing and reflecting was that I think I had put myself in the position of being the light for my stepkids. And I said, wait a minute, where is their mom in this picture? I'm like, their mom is the light. Their mom is up there shining down on them from above every single moment. And I have to let go of trying to be the light. And so I decided that the step parent maybe was more of the soil, kind of the stable base foundation to be there in a support role and help do some of the weed clearing in the garden too. So I really appreciated that garden analogy because it was visual. It helped me latch on to something and decide on a new direction that I could bring to the family. And it worked so much better to just step back and be in more of a support role, both for my husband and my stepkids.
It is interesting to hear how your perspective changed your role, or how you were able to change the perspective of your role when you could. And I love the analogy that you use with the garden and the sun and the ground. And there's a lot of really beautiful significance in that, Diane. Thank you.
Yeah, Diane, I have a question. So did you come back and share that with your spouse or your kids?
I did absolutely 100% with my spouse, because I needed him to know that I was making changes. And I think he really appreciated that. I had a tendency to be a gap filler. And, if he wasn't disciplining, I'd try to fill the gap. Or if I felt that we needed to recognize a birthday or an anniversary, I would fill the gap if it wasn't being done. So I think he really appreciated that. And I did share it with the kids too. They were still pretty young at that time. And I felt good about sharing it with them. A lot of times I would share things with them and not get much reaction. But I figure, going along with the garden analogy, I'm planting the seeds that I'm becoming more aware. So at least I planted those seeds. So.
Awesome.
Tom and Heather, you guys, in our prior meeting, you talked about an acronym that you use, CARE acronym. And I would love it if you would share what that means to you and how you came up with that idea.
So actually, one of the things I have gotten a chance to actually work full time for Inheritance of Hope now. And so I had the opportunity to kind of help as we were brainstorming ways to serve some of the families that we needed to, that had already experienced the loss of a parent. And so the way that we decided as far as our curriculum was going to go was using this acronym called CARE. which stands for celebrate, acknowledge, remember, and embrace. And it was a great opportunity to actually be able to get feedback when we were developing that, because I felt like in a lot of ways that was how we were living our lives already, the focus that we had and the intention that we had. So the C is celebrate. So we really want to celebrate both Shannon and John and their lives. And also one thing that we found was really important was the families that we had before we got together. This new family is great, but what about that family that we were before? That was really important for us to hold on to, and we found for our kids also. And so practically that kind of looks like special events on Shannon and John's birthdays, on the anniversary of their death. We have a special Christmas tree, a small Christmas tree that has ornaments with their pictures on it that we put up every year. We are intentional to take time separately, me and my boys, and Tom and his when needed. Even holidays in the past, we've had to do that. And then we make sure we have pictures of John and Shannon. We talk, like, there's no censorship when it comes to stories about them. We talk about them often, and then we still have relationship and connections with their families too. So that's just some of the practical way we do that. You want to talk about the A?
Sure. And so the A is just to acknowledge that is that we are in a different situation. To really just embrace that.
We're not on embrace yet.
Sorry.
He's trying to skip ahead. But no, just to acknowledge where we are and that things are very different. And that. A lot of this is making sure that there's safe space for open communication for us and with the kids. So the counselor that we met with really encouraged us to set up times for weekly family meetings, to just, have time to share, this is what's going on. This is like what really stinks right now. Why can't we do things this way? Just have some openness. But the thing that we had to keep in mind, and the thing that they had to keep in mind, was focusing on honesty, respect, responsibility, and caring. So you could say what you want as long as you went along with those four kind of core values. It was also important for us to continue having time with our kids, our bio kids, one-on-one, to check in with them and just keep that open communication, to acknowledge the loss and the change. And then remember is really remembering God's goodness in our lives, and not just our life now, but the way that He has provided for us in the past. So much looking back at that Red Sea, like how God parts the waters, He provides, He directs, and that He's still doing that. So a lot of that is just focusing on our personal journey in our faith, and then also with our kids, just really prioritizing our relationship with God. Now you can talk about.
Now I can talk about the embrace. So the E is being the embrace of just really embracing where we are and what God is doing in this family, and that it's different, and that it is just sometimes going to be hard, but He's not done with us, and we can just really rest in that and really embrace this new crazy family that we have.
So practically, a lot of that means prioritizing us, really making sure we have time for alone time, even if it's our dates like on the back deck with takeout, or like in our bedroom, or whatever it is, where we just are focusing on our relationship. We were very careful in making new traditions, but it was important to come up with those. We tried to prioritize even dates with our stepkids, times where we would just go do fun things with them, but it was really based on like when they were comfortable with it and what that looked like, trying to be very mindful of their comfort level and what they were okay with. And I think a big piece of this too has been being patient with each other, learning each other, and the kids too, and understanding that sometimes we just have to back off, like Diane was saying, like, it's not my place to guide what it looks like for Tom to do special celebrations with his kids when it comes to Shannon. So yeah, there's importance of us challenging each other and admonishing each other, but also really being able to, we've learned recently the importance of being able to identify and communicate our feelings, which he loves. That allows us to connect and really, instead of trying to argue with each other, it's much more of, oh, that matters to me because that matters to you. So even if I don't agree that you should be feeling that way, I've got to acknowledge it and try to support it. And that just helps us, I think, a lot embrace this new, and really our relationship is what determines really in a big way how everybody else is doing.
You're setting the temperature for sure. I mean, that marital relationship is the foundation, no matter, I mean, there's 60 plus different combinations of how blended families are made. And so, I mean, you guys have an interesting combination, Shar and Steve and my husband and I are more have the same type. Diane came in without any children. I mean, that we represent at least 3 to 5. I mean, I don't know how we count Heather and Tom's, but you guys are just, it's very complex, right? So I think a lot of those things that you guys mentioned are just keys for, step family, and not to dishonor, the families that are probably listening today, but I'm guessing some of them have blended in one of the 60 ways and not just both having experienced the deaths on both sides of their blend. So those are just great. I appreciate those. And those are things that I like that CARE acronym for even work that we do with blended families. It's just great reminders to celebrate, acknowledge, remember, and embrace in whatever that looks like for your family. So I appreciate you guys sharing that with us too.
Yeah, I really like that.
I have to give you credit if I use it. That's what I need to know.
I like the CARE acronym too. I think that's really helpful and gives you good guidelines.
Yeah.
I have a question for Chris. I'm going to start with Kristine, but feel free anybody to answer this because, I know for us, for Stephen and I, we weren't very educated in the world of blended family. In fact, my question is, what are some of the myths or some of the things you heard or beliefs about blended families?
Yeah, I think, some of the myths is like, this will just be a redo of my first family, or, oh, now you get to be happy. Like, okay. So your friends just think, well, now that you're recoupled or remarried or blended, however you want to say it, now you're just like the rest of us. So that was a big myth. And I think that I wanted to believe that too, because now I can control what happens under my roof. But there's all these external forces that didn't happen in my first family that now I have that we just have to navigate in a blended family. So that was one of the myths, like, oh, you're married, so now you can just be happy and control everything.
What about you, Diane? Did you have any myths or beliefs that?
The one that comes to mind in our situation was something that people would say to me, friends of mine, for example, and they would say, well, after the kids get over their grieving, you'll feel much more like a family. And, grief, you don't get over your grieving, right? I think grief is something that is with us for the rest of our lives over certain people or events or just lots of things that happen in our lives, but our loved ones especially, and we kind of grow around our grief, but we always carry that. And so I think that was a myth, like your family will get through their grieving. And instead, I know that grief just changes as we change over time. And it was going with the flow on that made our bonding more successful.
As I made an opening statement about all step families or blended families are born out of loss. It is also a grief thing. And Diane, in your book, you'd probably touch on that because that's I love that you brought up the topic of grief, whether you're in a blended family like Steve and I or Kristine and Mike versus someone who's experienced death, or Tom and Heather and you, Diane. The word grief is very much something. It's a term we need to understand for ourselves and then also for our children or stepchildren.
Yeah, and I think there's so many layers that affect how we grieve. It's very personal. As a culture in America, I think, we tend to be death avoiders and therefore grief avoiders. We don't talk openly about our grieving. Whereas, just as an example, I remember attending a funeral of a Latina family, and one of their customs is open wailing in front of the casket. And I had never been exposed to that before. And all of these things are such eye openers, like so many nuances that affect our personal journeys with grieving. So I think the ability, whether divorce or death, to recognize that every family member is grieving something, and to be able to do the roller coaster ride with them, and also recognize our own grieving as step parents as well, because we maybe expected an ideal that we're not living.
Yeah. Tom and Heather, how did that go in your step family dynamic with grief, handling the loss and then navigating grief with actually, I'm kind of curious about the kids, because I think that I know for yourself, you're suffering that and mourning that loss, but then what about with the children? And then you introduce a new partner into the relationship. So, I mean, there's a lot going on there with the grieving just in and of itself, but how did you handle that with your children?
I mean, I would say that it really depends upon the children, for one, and that I don't think that I know that I think we approached each one a little differently, depending upon where they were as far as the age and just how they are in the personality.
Well, we are different in a lot of ways. I'm much more of a planner. So when it came to my kids grieving, I don't think it'd be a surprise to hear. You wouldn't be offended if I said that I was much more intentional.
Oh yes, no.
Immediately with my kids, I did recognize, number one, there are different ways to tell, I think, when they need to kind of work through some of their emotions. Like one of mine gets really angered. And so then when I just feel like he's super angry, that kind of encourages me to lean in a little bit more and just kind of sit with him a little bit. But we also looked at, there were opportunities for grief camps, which my kids took part in. One of mine did much better with counseling. So he did that once a month. But they're definitely, I think a big piece for us as we've come together, since we do have, divorce and death, sometimes it's hard to pinpoint, what is this feeling? What is this fear? So it's not necessarily that maybe we even recognize when it is for them, because they're still working on, especially because they're boys, right? We're in this culture where boys don't show emotions. They don't talk about their feelings. That's not okay. And so that's kind of, I think, in itself, just a mold we're trying to really break of, that it is acceptable and important and healthy to talk about your feelings. The 12-year-old is probably the most malleable. He's been the one that's kind of the most open. The older boys, they're 17 and 19 now. Because two of ours are only 2 weeks apart, but they're much more closed off when it comes to grieving and allowing us to really be a part of that. So it's something that we continue to try to just, like I said, having those opportunities for safe space, of those times when I'm one with them. I mean, we haven't figured it out. We're still just.
And that's I think the biggest thing is I know that I had somebody comment that they had actually lost their spouse a year ago, and they said, I can't believe I'm back in this again. They thought that they were going to be able to move further, if you will, after a year. And it's like, no, this is something that's going to be, like you said, a lifelong process. And I think just acknowledging that is just so critical, even with the kids, of that this is not something that you're just going to be able to push through and work through, but we're going to be continuing to work on this.
There definitely is a real struggle with grieving ourselves too. I mean, your kids, you've got to support them, right? First, really. I mean, so I think learning to rest has been important for us to be able to work through our own grief also. It's been something we've been working on. Lots of work here.
Right. And I'm guessing the age of the kids matters a lot, because we know, I mean, in general, when we have discussions at our small group, our small blended family group, we'll be like, is this, somebody will come in, my 15-year-old stepson just came in the house and he went to his room and he shut his door, and then he came out, ate with us, hardly talked, and went to his room. And we'd stop and we'd be like, okay, so is this a blended family thing, or is this a 15-year-old thing, like teenage thing, right? Because I personally didn't want to hang out with my parents a ton when I was 15 to 19 years old. So it's an interesting, and I'm guessing the grieving process, just grieving from death, grieving from divorce, the age of the child really probably plays into that in their developmental stages, would be my guess.
Yeah.
Diane,
you mentioned and shared a story with us earlier on a separate call about balloons.
Yeah.
And I actually really love that story. It was pretty heart touching, and just how what you learned from that. And, I'm sure there were a lot of emotions wrapped up around it. If you could share the story, I think our viewers would love that.
I do think that no matter what the age of the kids, and I'm glad you brought that up, Kristine, being an observer of their grief rather than the leader of what to do about their grief makes a lot of sense. So one of the death anniversaries of their mom, I had been reading about things that you could do to memorialize a lost parent, because I was really trying to learn. I was trying to do the right thing. And I came up with this balloon release idea. And I was just taken with this idea. I just thought the kids would love it and my husband would love it. And I even went as far as to go out and buy the balloons. I picked, what I had heard were their mom's favorite colors. But the mistake I made was I never asked them what they wanted to do to celebrate the death anniversary. So there I was with my great idea, taking the lead, not observing. And they wanted nothing to do with this balloon release. They didn't know what to say. They didn't know what to do. And my husband just said, I think I'm just going to take them for a walk. And so in the end, what I ended up doing, I had the balloons. I'm like, I'm doing this. And this is my chance to connect with their mom. And I went out to a park and I released those balloons, and I just watched every last one fly into the heavens. And I just said, I'm taking care of your children. I'm trying to do the right thing. I just used it as a moment to connect with her. And that helped me so much. And it didn't matter anymore that the kids didn't want to be part of that. But I also was a little embarrassed, right? I planned this big thing, and it just, no pun intended, but it didn't fly with them. So that's when I said, okay, all right, I got it. Observe and work with my spouse. Be the earth in the garden, right? Be the foundation, be there, and tell my spouse, hey, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm hearing. What do you think? Do you think they're grieving, re-grieving? And that definitely worked better.
It's a great turnaround story where, you had one expectation and then you're able to turn it around and really find joy and a little bit of, it was a tenderhearted story. I really appreciated that story. Thank you, Diane. Since all of us are in blended families, we share the reality that blended families appreciate blended family answers for blended family questions. What are some of the resources that you have found your answers to or from?
Well, I can go. We've mentioned his name a few times, but Ron Deal has been key in our journey. Just the books that he's produced, the Smart Step Family conferences that he runs. I just think that he has a lot of insight and a tender heart for blended families. And then he's written a few books with others. So I really value Ron Deal's perspective on a lot of things. I mean, there's plenty of other books, but and I'm gonna do a shameless plug because Ron actually worked with us on a blended family web application. So in his new book, Preparing to Blend, he actually features a web application that my husband and our three oldest in our blended family just launched. It's called blending.love. And it is literally a tool that you can go through as a blended family or somebody who loves on and walks beside. So we call them advisors, but that be a pastor, a therapist, a counselor, a coach, a small group leader, whoever's walking with that blended family. It literally draws out that family map for that blended family. So you can talk about what you're feeling. So Ron was instrumental in just helping us with input on some of that, and then featured it in his book. So if anybody's interested in that as a tool, we hope it's a tool that other people years from now are talking as a resource that really helped navigate the blended family journey. Because in addition to drawing it out, there are resources and tips. There's videos from Ron. And at the back, at the very end, is a whole list of resources, including Step Family Network, but podcasts, books, events that we have either personally attended or heard or read, or recommendations. So blending.love is hopefully a resource that others can use. And if you're interested in it as a family, you have to have a code to use it right now. So if you log into blending.love, it's not blending.com.love, it's blending.love. You can put in MAP deal 30, so MAPDEAL 30, and you can do your own family map utilizing that. And if you work with others, you'll see there's an advisor page on there, and you can work it with groups. You can use it for a whole group of people. So those are a couple resources. One that I hope is useful for others, and one that has been extremely useful for our family, and then those that we lead.
Yeah, the family mapping is really, I love that. That visual is so intriguing, and especially where you've tied in the emotions. That's a really neat resource, and again, visualization. Diane, what were some of the resources that helped you navigate some of the hard dynamics?
I 100% echo Ron Deal's books. The original one that I read was The Smart Step Family. And Ron did put a chapter in there about dealing with a death in the family. And that's what got me going. The whole Family Life Blended team, there's Gayla Grace, who has lived a similar path with marrying a widower. And then outside of Family Life Blended, Tammy and Jay Daughtry, who are with Co-Parenting International. They have a couple of businesses. They have One Heart, Two Homes, which is more focused on the divorce aspect. But Tammy married Jay. Jay had lost his wife. And I feel like they're extremely knowledgeable about step family issues, and they speak all around the country. So, but, I mentioned that Ron had encouraged me to write a book. So I'm just going to show that. So you see the cover. So let me take that off. So that's Step Parenting the Grieving Child. And there's a teen on the back. I just had to show that because we updated the cover to include the teen last year, which was really fun. And then I have a Facebook group of the same name. So if you're on Facebook, you can go request admission to that group. There are a few questions that need to be answered because we try to keep the group really just for people who truly have dealt with a loss in the family and are trying to learn how to either be better step parents or even just be able to vent and get some advice from others in the group. So those were the main resources that really helped me.
Yeah. Tom and Heather, resources that you would recommend?
We definitely agree with this. Ron Deal and his resources and the Step Family Summit has been really helpful. And say a few names that really stood out as encouraging were Michelle Couchette and Sabrina McDonald, and Brenda and Gil Stewart, that we've really gained some wisdom from them. And actually, Inheritance of Hope now has a blended family group that is meeting quarterly on Zoom. So we definitely encourage people to join us for that.
And again, that's just a place to get together and make connections and just have people that can sympathize and just have those, oh, me too moments. Just really trying to create that support network.
Yeah, our tagline is resources and relationships. So it's just an opportunity for being with people who have that shared experience and kind of working through that.
And I'd say, I mean, to dovetail on the group experience, when we started our blended family group, it wasn't because we had all the answers. Far from it. We didn't want to be alone. And I think that that is key. And if you join a blended family group with Inheritance of Hope or start your own, I mean, statistics say that 40% of adults in the United States live in some sort of blended family structure. So your neighbors and your coworkers and your friends, there is at least one that I can't imagine that somebody wouldn't know somebody, at least one other family, to walk this journey with them. So I think group is very, like you said, relationship and resources. And just like we all shared, the more people you know and the more people you connect with, the more resources you get to come in contact with and see why is it useful for you or how did those sorts of things. So I encourage people to get in a group or form your own.
So last question, as the holidays are approaching, and, I think it's important to understand that can be the most stressful time of the year for step families. And so what are some of the things that you do to lighten that up, to make it a little more manageable and to breeze through it a little more? I don't know what's the word I'm looking for?
The step stress.
Without feeling crazy. Yeah. So
yes.
Give us some insight. And Heather and Tom, maybe let's start with you guys.
That's a big one. I guess the biggest thing that I would say is to have patience and to not feel like you have to. Patience and communication, I think, would be the biggest two things I would say. And to say that every family is going to look different, and it just really takes working together to figure out what that looks like. And again, I think that we've said this before, but the more we can be on the same page really leads to so much more comfort and stability in that relationship that allows us to work through what holidays and what stressful things look like.
Yeah, I think maybe in the beginning, one of the things that was really difficult was, but we always do it this way. And I hate that anyway. So there was really, I had to be very self-controlled in the times that I heard that. But there was a sense of, we also need to respect some of the traditions that came before. And so like Tom said, it took a lot of time to really just decide, what does this look like for us? And what does this look like right now? Because next year it might be different. But right now, this is what me and my boys need. And we recognize, though, that this is not what your family needs. And so being okay with it not looking a certain way, like I think other people have this expectation, like we talked about before, oh, you're just a normal, happy family now, which I'm not sure if that exists even in nuclear families. But just saying like, all right, when we did Thanksgiving apart, it didn't matter what other people thought of that. That was what our family needed. And we were okay with it. And so we really just had to be respectful to others and ask them to respect us. And, this is where we are. And, thank you for your concern. And bye-bye.
That's great. That's really insightful. Diane, what about you? I mean, as far as, again, during the holidays, you're still dealing with children that are going through loyalty issues, and grieving is still very much something to consider too. So how do you navigate that if there's loyalty issues or still in the grief of emotions?
I think really recognizing, and to use the CARE acronym, embracing that there are traditions that are important to the kids and to your spouse as well. that they may be attached to, but not voicing. So I think starting early to have the conversations, or at least lean into your spouse to have those conversations with the kids. And let's draw out what is really most important for celebrating, let's just say, the Christmas holiday. I was attached to certain traditions from my family of origin that I had always done before joining the family. And I never really had to, share those or discuss those with anyone. So I know, Heather, in a prior conversation, you were so sweet. You're like, you're so special to step into this family and raise these kids. Well, yes. And I was also selfish. I was scrabbling for control in some ways, shapes, and forms. And some of those Christmas traditions did come out. We had a lovely experience where we both agreed that we wanted live Christmas tree. And we went to chop it down at a local tree farm here in Colorado. And we found a tree with two tops, in the same tree. And that was really a pivotal moment, because I grew up with this beautiful star that we put at the top of the tree, but the kids grew up with an angel that was this crepe paper angel, very delicate. And that year we put both toppers on the tree, and it kind of broke the ice to say what I was referring to before, which is we are all part of the team that recognizes that this is two families coming together with separate traditions. So thank God, literally thank God for that tree. When I found that tree, I was like, thank you, God. So.
There is no coincidence in that. I've never seen a little top tree.
Yeah, that was the Lord at work right there.
Kristine, I know we're out of time, but would you wrap us up on this event and an interview, and just kind of give us some good words as we wrap this up?
Sure. I thank all of you. I think it's great to hear everybody's perspectives and stories. I think we relate to stories extremely well. And so I want to thank you for participating with us here. And I've learned a lot just by listening. So, and sharing your experience here. So I hope as the viewers are watching, just that they feel that they're not alone. And we've said that a lot, but you're not alone, that we're cheering for you. And I actually would like to have an opportunity to pray over everybody, if that's okay. So dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity today just to share and learn and love and support. Lord, we know that your love covers all, and that you see all, and that you see us and each on us on our journeys. Lord, I just ask that you bless the messages here, and that you touch the hearts of those who are able to hear it. I thank you for your goodness. I just pray all these things in your Son's holy and precious name. Amen.
Thanks, Kristine.
Yeah.
I wish we had more time, because this is such an interesting and such a deep topic. I feel like we almost need a part 2.
Right. Next year.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for your time and for your great input and content. We really appreciate it. And let's do it again next year.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.